Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not telling random teens that they're doomed, I'm here at the Wolfula reviewing movies. There was this movie that came out in the late 70s called Halloween. What it was isn't important to this story. What matters is what it made. Monetarily, that is. Halloween was cheap as hell to make, and it made a pretty penny at the box office. Halloween's success was unprecedented for an indie flick, so imitators were inevitable. Thus, the slasher film subgenre was born. Slashers are very simple films. Got a camera, a knife, a mask, and a group of young actors? Well, sir, you can make a slasher film. And so many did. One of those guys who did it was a former porn director named Sean S. Cunningham. Yeah, Wes Craven and Sean were porn directing buddies during the 70s. Who knew? Anyway, Cunningham's take on Halloween's formula would be dubbed Friday the 13th. But he didn't really have any more to go on beyond a neat title. The title was pretty much the only writing done for the film before it was greenlit. Yeah, Cunningham put an ad out in Variety to get his Friday the 13th movie financed when he didn't even know what the movie was.
The point of the ad was to see if anybody was going to sue us and if we could actually use the title Friday the 13th. But as it turns out, not only did we not get sued, but we got phone calls from distributors saying, we'd love to see this film. What is it? When can we see it? And we didn't even have a script.
It's a bit of a sham, but it worked, and eventually the story was figured out later, which is a great approach. Speaking of which, there really isn't much of a story to talk about here, which makes my life a lot easier. You see, there's this summer getaway for kids called Camp Crystal Lake, where some bad things happened that may or may not have occurred on Friday the 13th, but the place became considered unlucky anyway.
We weren't doing anything, we were just messing around.
Over the years, Camp Blood, as it was called, would close and reopen more often than a Chipotle due to all the mishaps. Well, in 1980, a never-nude got it in his head to try to reopen the camp himself. This would never fly today, not just because of the camp being run by a sexually confused Donald Sutherland, but also because parents today don't let their kids go into the front yard without a fucking leash on. They're not gonna send their kids to a summer camp nicknamed Camp Blood, unless they really hate their kids, which might be the case actually if they make their kids wear a leash, whatever. So this mustache daddy named Christy is fixing up the camp on a Friday the 13th, along with his future camp counselors. There's a mysterious killer on the loose, though, who does some killer stuff every now and then. That's pretty much the whole story of this movie. I don't know. I think the main problem with Friday the 13th story isn't how minimalistic it is. Halloween and a lot of other great horror movies have very little in the way of deep stories to tell. No, the problem with Friday the 13th story is that there's a lot of pointless scenes where nothing of consequence happens. Filler, essentially, that doesn't drive the story or add to the atmosphere.
Hey, you guys, you ready to go back to work?
Yeah.
Like, there's a scene where a snake is found in one of the cabins. So one of the camp counselors kills it, and kills about 3 minutes with it. By the way, that snake was actually killed for this pointless scene. I'm sure it appreciated that.
Is it dead?
Either that or it's got a very short clone.
There are pointless scenes in Friday the 13th for days. One of the most famous is the game of Strip Monopoly, which is just regular Monopoly, but you take off your clothes arbitrarily. Alice rolls the dice, somebody has to strip for some reason. Monopoly is also like the worst game to add a stripping twist to. The game takes 4 hours to fucking play. I think the amount of time mixed with the nudity aspect makes for an impossible proposition. The worst filler in Friday the 13th, though, is when Alice, played by Adrienne King, tries to get away from the killer, so she barricades herself in one of the cabins. The process of barricading herself is shown in great detail for a good couple of minutes or so, like we're watching an episode of Scooby-Doo here. It's not exciting having to watch an actress stack objects up against a door. Unless that's like your thing, you sick freak. The worst part is that the barricading is proved to be entirely pointless. When somebody shows up in a car outside a little later, Alice demolishes her makeshift barricade and heads out, just killing time until the next scene. So anyway, yeah, lots of filler. Almost to the point where you can forget that this is a horror movie until the final act. Friday the 13th can get really dull, but the movie does have a strange charm to me. There's a warmness to the movie, a quaintness that's hard to describe, but makes me want to watch the movie under some covers with a mug of hot cocoa close by.
Well, what do I owe you?
Just a night on the town.
Still, it can be a dull watch regardless. What gives Friday the 13th true merit is the kills, a contribution made by the legendary Tom Savini. The death effects really were impressive. You know, sometimes it's scarier not to see something, but still, every now and then, there's nothing wrong with a good axe to the face. The kills in Friday the 13th set the bar for gore in horror films and made way for a lot of bloody movies in the 80s. Violence is beautiful. Honestly, the funny thing about Friday the 13th is the fact that what makes the movie good has very little to do with what the filmmakers and actors fucking do in the movie.
You're an American original.
I'm an American original. Dumb kid.
Like, this movie has an amazing score by Harry Manfredini that only plays when the killer is present.
Ta-da!
It sounds a bit like Psycho's score, but the standout arrangement of Friday the 13th is the now iconic... It's a great bit of horror music, not just because it's creepy sounding, it is, but because it's tied heavily to the motivation of the killer. Friday the 13th score manages to give the killer a presence, a shape, a personality without having to show anything more than a hand. Try to get away with that, Spielberg. Oh wait, you did. Never mind. The music of Friday the 13th has a lot of character, but the actual characters?
No, absolutely not.
I'd be lying if I said that Friday the 13th had a great cast of characters.
Emergency generator.
And I'm not gonna do that. The characters are all pretty bland, especially Alice. No offense to Adrienne King's performance, but Alice just doesn't have anything going for her, and she doesn't really stand out all that much among the rest of the characters.
Baltic Avenue. I'll buy it.
No one ever lands on Baltic Avenue.
I think it's a pretty color.
Friday the 13th has a secret weapon, though. Crazy Ralph.
You're going to Camp Blood, ain't you? God damn it, Ralph, get out of here. Go on, get!
Crazy Ralph is self-explanatory. His name is Ralph, and he is crazy.
It's got a death curse.
The guy is fixated upon Camp Blood and shows up twice to warn people about the place, but other than that, nothing is known about him, which makes Ralph one of the best characters in the series.
God, set me.
Okay, I'm gonna spoil Friday the 13th right now in order to talk about the killer. It shouldn't really matter if I spoil this movie because it's already been spoiled by popular culture, but if you do want to go into this movie for the first time fresh, skip to this time code. The killer of Friday the 13th is revealed to be a former cook for Camp Blood, Mrs. Voorhees. This isn't really a Scooby-Doo situation. Mrs. Voorhees is never shown at any point before this reveal.
How are you? Well, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies.
That's sort of disappointing, because Friday the 13th could have had a mystery going for it that could have been pieced together before the reveal, but maybe it would have been a little too Scooby-Doo-ish. Nothing wrong with that, though. You should know Mrs. Voorhees' motivation by now. Jason, her son drowned, Camp's fault.
Oh, I couldn't let them open this place again. Could I? Not after what happened.
It's crazy how our first look at a horror icon was as a child and as a victim. It's also crazy how Victor Miller, the writer of Friday the 13th, is credited as the creator of Jason when, really, Tom Savini created Jason's iconic look as a hydrocephalic kid. You know, that's just me. The late great Betsy Palmer only took this gig because she wanted some quick and easy work to buy a new car, and for a while she looked down on the Friday the 13th series. Man, though, Palmer really had a ball with the role of Mrs. Voorhees.
Oh, God, this place. Steve should never have opened this place again. There's been too much trouble here.
The casting of Mrs. Voorhees is brilliant. Who would expect the killer in a horror flick would be a wholesome maternal figure like Betsy?
He wasn't a very good swimmer.
Palmer may not have been enthusiastic about Friday the 13th, but she did her part, and then some. Besides the effects, Mrs. Voorhees is what makes this movie truly worthwhile. Palmer doesn't have much screen time, but her sudden shift from kindness to madness is a sight to behold, leaving quite the impression for how little screen time she gets in the flick.
Look what you did to him!
It's a shame Palmer didn't have much of a career going forward, but the fact that someone so kind could find such a dark, creepy place inside themselves is a testament to their talents.
Kill her, Mommy. killer.
Rest in peace, Mrs. Voorhees. May your role never be shrewdly replaced ever again. Friday the 13th has a hell of an ending. Not from a narrative perspective, though. Story-wise, it's pretty stupid, but seeing Mrs. Voorhees fucking beheaded and then seeing Alice assaulted by a zombified baby Jason is incredible. Really, though? She wakes up and it's just a dream?
Jason?
In the lake, the one who attacked me, the one who pulled me underneath the water.
I know they're doing the Carrie ending here, but why is Alice dreaming of a boy that was mentioned only briefly to her in the middle of her being hunted by a crazy woman? Doesn't make much sense.
Then he's still there.
Friday the 13th is certainly a classic horror flick, but mostly because of the reputation of the series that it spawned, and hell, the slasher movie trend that it began for that matter. I mean, Halloween may have established the slasher formula, but Friday the 13th set it in stone, and demonstrated to everyone that they too can make their own Halloween clone. The movie taken by itself, though? Well, it's just okay. But this doesn't discount the efforts put into the film by Tom Savini, Harry Manfredini, and Betsy Palmer. The movie is just really derivative, borrowing things liberally from popular horror flicks, and besides that, the movie has some really dull stretches, which leaves these two guys to blame mostly. Should be ashamed of yourselves. Still, if you want to see where a phenomenon began, then there's no better place to start than, the beginning. I give the original Friday the 13th a Crazy Ralph out of Strip Monopoly. Oh yeah, Kevin Bacon was in this movie. Weird.
Guess I always wanted to work with children. I hate when people call them kids. Sounds like little goats.